What's up guys, my name is Ace, and Season 2 is here for Modern Warfare 2, and today we're going to be going into great detail with all of the weapon changes that happened with this update. And I'm not just going to read the patch notes out for you guys. I went in yesterday and did a ton of testing. It took a lot longer than I expected. I'm going to be sharing exact damage values and side-by-side comparisons for all of these. And without further ado, let's just dive right into it because we have a lot to cover today, and we'll start this off with the M13B. With this gun, they added an extra damage range. It used to only have 2 different damage ranges. And they also adjusted the damage values a little, and they added an upper torso damage multiplier. So previously, it didn't matter where in the body you shot them, you were dealing the same amount of damage. Now you deal extra damage to the upper torso, but to compensate for that, they slightly decreased the maximum base damage, as you can see there. And with this, in practical terms, what this means is we now have a 4-shot kill potential as long as you hit 2 upper torso shots, whereas previously you couldn't get a 4-shot kill with body shots with the M13. And with this, you'll get a time to kill of 213 milliseconds, which is right around average for an assault rifle up close now, whereas previously it was very, very slow. So overall, this is a fairly noticeable buff to the M13B. You just want to make sure now that you're hitting those upper torso shots. Then let's move on to the Kastov 7.62. This one got a small damage reduction, but this only applied at the longer ranges. And it also turns out they added an extra damage range in here as well. Essentially with this, in the vast majority of gunfights you find yourself in on 6v6 maps, you'll never really notice a difference with the Kastov 7.62. It's basically the same gun. However, now beyond 58 meters, which is a very long range for 6v6 at least, if you're not hitting a bunch of upper torso shots, you can take up to 5 shots to kill with this gun now, whereas previously it would never take more than 4 shots to kill. So it's not going to be quite as effective at really long ranges, but it's just as good for close to mid ranges. After that, we had some semi-auto fire rate adjustments on the Lockman 5.56. Our semi-auto fire rate cap previously was 377 rounds per minute, and therefore our best time to kill with that was 318 milliseconds, which is nowhere even close to competitive. Whereas now they bumped that rate of fire cap up to 474 rounds per minute, which means we can now kill in 253 milliseconds. So it's at least somewhat viable now, although for the most part, I'd just stick that in full auto. As for the M4, they also increased its semi-auto fire rate cap. However, based on my testing, this was a negligible difference. I only detected a 2 round per minute difference here, which means it has no noticeable difference whatsoever on our time to kill potential. Next up in the patch notes, they mentioned they fixed an issue with the STB with the single tap mod, and this is something I discovered while doing the gun guide. As you can see here, this was pre-patch. You can see on that left leg, for whatever reason, you dealt 40% less damage there, but they have fixed that. It was a bug. That no longer applies anymore. And now let's move into the battle rifles, and the first one here is the Lockman 7.62. In semi-auto, they adjusted the fire rate cap, although unfortunately it went the opposite direction based on my testing. In the patch notes it says they increased the semi-auto fire rate cap, however it's actually noticeably slower than it was pre-patch. It's now 419 rounds per minute, down from 492, which harms our time to kill potential, although that is still a very fast and competitive time to kill, even with this nerf to our rate of fire. And on top of this, when you're in semi-auto mode, it actually got a nice damage buff at longer ranges beyond 38 meters. Our limb damage used to be 32, and they've bumped that up to 35, which means at those longer ranges, it will never take you more than 3 shots to kill now, whereas previously, if you were hitting limbs, you could increase that up to a 4-shot kill. So even with that apparent unintentional nerf to the rate of fire cap in semi-auto, I would still consider this to be a net buff for the Lockman 7.62 in semi-auto. As for when you use this gun in full auto, we have a totally different damage profile, and they did nerf this damage profile, and while you see the numbers change a fair amount while looking at this, when we're looking at 100 health, so regular core modes with no armor equipped, this isn't going to have much of an impact at all on your ability to kill enemies. I mean, you may be able to find really specific situations like that 3rd damage range pre-patch. If you hit 1 headshot and 1 torso shot, it would be a kill. Now you need both of those shots to the head, but that's a pretty edge case scenario. So realistically speaking, for core 6v6, there was no noticeable impact here, and it's pretty clear this nerf was designed much more around DMZ and Warzone. Although it is also worth noting, with full auto mode on the Lockman 7.62, they have slightly reduced the recoil, and as we can see here, looking at side by side, it's definitely been toned down a little bit on this gun, so it should be a bit easier to control in full auto. Next in the battle rifle category, we have the FTAC Recon. And for full auto mode, in the patch notes, it says that they decrease the full auto upper torso damage, but it turns out based on my testing, they actually buffed this a little bit, and now we maintain a 3-shot kill potential as long as you're hitting upper torso shots out to 42.5 meters, whereas previously it was only 33.5 meters. So that's quite interesting. They also say they reduced the full auto recoil with the FTAC Recon, and when you look at the side-by-side, you can see it's slightly better post-patch compared to pre-patch, but it's not a large adjustment by any means. They also mentioned they sped up the aim down sight time. This applies to full auto and semi-auto on the FTAC Recon. Previously, it was 263 milliseconds. Now, based on my hand testing at 120 FPS, it's 255 milliseconds, so a very slight adjustment there. And then let's get into our semi-auto damage adjustments. The first thing they mentioned is they increased the close range damage distance. However, based on my testing, there was no change to that whatsoever, or at least no measurable change there. However, they also buffed the lower torso damage multiplier. And as we can see here, now we're going to get much more consistent 2-shot kills with the FTAC Recon and semi-auto, because pre-patch you needed to mix upper torso shots in if you wanted to maintain a 2-shot kill, whereas now you can shoot them anywhere in the torso out to 42.5 meters and you'll maintain a 2-shot kill as long as you're in semi-auto. So this is actually quite a big buff to semi-auto for the FTAC Recon. As for the next change, this is with the SO14. The first thing they mentioned here is they increased the semi-auto fire rate. And this did increase quite noticeably from 429 rounds per minute up to 542 rounds per minute, which means our new time to kill potential is 111 milliseconds up close, which is pretty great. And then on top of this, there were some slight damage adjustments to this, especially at longer ranges and with the headshot damage on the SO14. But at the end of the day, these are completely meaningless changes for core game modes. This is yet another change that was clearly designed for game modes with armor like DMZ and Warzone. Now finally for the battle rifles, let's get into the TAQ-V, and the first thing they mentioned here is they reduced the semi-auto rate of fire, but based on my testing, that hasn't changed at all. However, there were some damage adjustments in semi-auto, but these damage adjustments, once again, are negligible for core game modes. They're clearly designed for modes with armor, and the TAQ-V is actually a little bit more effective with upper torso and torso damage against armored enemies. Without armor, it's effectively the exact same gun in semi-auto modes. And in full auto modes, we did see some nerfs to damage with this. However, it doesn't have much of an impact on this gun. You could argue that it's slightly less consistent with a 3-shot kill from 34.5 meters to 46 meters. And also beyond 46 meters, now you can't get a 2-shot kill to the head. But honestly, those are fairly edge case scenarios, and once again, this is clearly more designed for the game modes with armor. In core game modes, you shouldn't be noticing too much of a difference with the TAQ-V. As for the pistols, the X13 had some adjustments, and with a single gun, when you're not using it akimbo, they added 2 extra damage ranges to this, and with this, we also technically saw a buff to the damage value, so now it has a 4-shot kill potential up close for a time to kill of 195 milliseconds. And we'll look at the ranges in just a little bit. Before we do that, I want to have a quick look at akimbo, and basically with this, up close and personal, it should be just as effective as it was pre-patch. Essentially, it looks like what they were targeting is akimbo at mid to longer ranges. You can no longer stretch out your range with akimbo and still be effective, because now you're dealing as little as 8 damage per shot, which is very, very low. And now let's have a look at these range adjustments that applied to this. Keep in mind this is with the base gun without akimbo equipped. And as you can see, we get a very short 4-shot kill potential at 5.8 meters, but that's a nice buff to the X13 up close and personal. And also our 6 and 7-shot kill ranges have been increased as well. So overall, with a single gun, this actually got some nice buffs to it. It's going to be a lot better than it was before. As for the next thing in the patch notes, this is the launchers, and unfortunately I don't have any pre-patch values or testing or anything to show for these, so I'm just going to read these ones out. With the Strela P, they removed the activation distance for projectiles, and projectiles will now explode at any range. Then for the RPG, there was a small increase to the amount of splash damage that you deal, however they've also reduced the range of that splash damage. And now let's get into the LMG category, and we'll start this off with the RPK. And with this, when it comes to damage values, there were some slight adjustments at mid to longer ranges. However, these weren't massive changes by any means, and for the most part, this gun is going to feel the same as it did before damage-wise in 6v6. However, it's going to be slightly less consistent with a 3-shot kill from 35.5 meters to 57 meters. Instead of needing 1 upper torso shot mixed in with 2 lower torso shots, you now need 2 upper torso shots mixed in with a torso shot. But outside of that, this wasn't a massive change to the RPK by any means. Additionally though, there was a range nerf to this. However, it turns out that was only about a 5% nerf to our range, so you probably won't notice this change a whole lot. However, they also slightly increased the aim down sight time, and based on my hand testing, it went from 430 milliseconds up to about 450 milliseconds. And there was a small reduction to our aim down sight movement speed from 1.99 meters per second down to 1.9 meters per second. So in isolation, each of these changes probably aren't that noticeable on the RPK, but when you combine all of them together, this gun is going to feel slightly worse than it did pre-patch. As for the only other LMG that got changed with this update, this is with the RAAL MG, and we actually saw a fairly noticeable nerf to the recoil on this. As you can see here, there is a big difference between pre-patch and post-patch when firing 30 rounds, and therefore you are going to have to compensate for that quite a bit more than you had to before. And with that, it's now time to move into the marksman rifle category, and with the EBR-14, they nerfed the damage a little bit at the longest ranges, so you can no longer get a 2-shot kill to the upper torso at really long ranges. However, they also buffed the upper torso damage in all the other ranges, so that's pretty interesting. Once again, this is clearly designed more for DMZ and Warzone, and you should find upper torso shots are going to be more effective in those modes, but for core game modes, you shouldn't really notice any change with the EBR-14, aside from that loss of ability to get a 2-shot kill to the upper torso at really long ranges that you'll probably not even find yourself in on the 6v6 maps. But then after that, we got some buffs to the TAQ-M, and the first thing they did is they buffed the upper torso damage, although they did nerf the final damage range, the longest damage range, slightly. However, once again, these changes have no impact whatsoever at 100 health. This is only going to help you in situations with armor, and they slightly increased the rate of fire, but this is a negligible increase. It went from 231 rounds per minute up to 238 rounds per minute. As for melee, all they mentioned here is they increased the non-lunging melee damage range, so you're not going to lunge into targets any more effectively. In that sense, the melee weapons are going to feel the same. But with this, it seems like it was basically just designed so that you can now knife equipment that's on the ground while crouching. You don't have to go fully prone in order to knife a claymore, for instance. You can do that from a crouch. And now let's finally move into the SMG category, and I'm sure a lot of you guys were waiting for this one. The Vaznev 9K, according to the patch notes, got reduced mid to long range damage. However, based on my testing, when you look at this was a completely meaningless change. This changes absolutely nothing with this gun, and therefore, for all intents and purposes, the Vaznev 9K went untouched with this update. As for the Minibak though, this one got some very noticeable changes to its damage, and this was a general nerf in close to mid ranges to our damage values, but more importantly, they have now separated lower torso from upper torso, whereas previously those were the same damage, and now you're gonna have to start mixing in upper torso shots if you want to maintain a 3-shot kill up close and personal, whereas previously you could shoot them anywhere in the torso and easily maintain a 3-shot kill. So it's actually going to be very noticeably less consistent with a 3-shot kill, but still very doable. You just have to make sure you hit those upper torso shots. And on top of this, they did nerf our ranges by a noticeable margin as well with the Minibak. Our 3-shot kill range, our 5-shot kill range, and our 6-shot kill ranges have all been reduced. Our 4-shot kill range, though, went unchanged. And then finally for SMGs, we have the Fennec 45, and with this, they said they decreased the damage overall, and they decreased headshot damage. And that first statement was simply untrue. The damage is either exactly the same, or in the case of upper torso damage at those longer ranges, they actually slightly increased them based on my tests. However, they did definitely nerf the headshot damage, and therefore it's going to be slightly less effective when mixing headshots in with body shots. But honestly, those are going to be really edge case situations, and for the most part, at least at 100 HP, you're not really going to notice much of a difference with the Fennec 45. It's basically just as effective as it was pre-patch, minus the headshots. But then finally, for individual weapons that have changed, we have the Signal 50 sniper rifle. And with this one, the first thing they mentioned is a reduction to our sprint out speed, which is a nerf to our sprint out time. And based on my tests, the standard sprint out time used to be 250 milliseconds, it's now 275 milliseconds, whereas the tactical sprint out time, based on my hand testing at least, was unchanged. It's still 375 milliseconds, just like pre-patch. Additionally, our base movement speed pre-patch was 4.44 meters per second, and post-patch is now 4.38 meters per second, so a little bit of a nerf there. And there was also a small decrease to bullet velocity. This is very difficult to hand test with perfect accuracy, but to the best of my ability, it looks like they've reduced the bullet velocity from 650 meters per second down to 600 meters per second. So it will be a little bit less effective in that area. Now, finally, for the Signal 50, they reduced the long-range damage, and so let's have a look at how they changed this. It turns out this is only going to apply to game modes with armor. In core game modes, your one-shot kill potential is still upper torso, neck, or head at those longer ranges, and it's still never going to take you more than 2 shots to kill to the body. But when you start mixing armor in for Warzone or DMZ, if you're hitting limb shots, for instance, it's now going to take you extra shots to kill. And with that, that's finally going to wrap it up for today's video on all of the weapon balancing changes that we saw with the Season 2 update. Overall, I wouldn't say there were any massive changes to any of the guns. Like, I don't think they really destroyed any guns or suddenly buffed any guns to the point where they're like so much better than they were pre-patch. For regular multiplayer, most of these were fairly minor adjustments that you won't even really notice a difference with. And with that, I am curious to hear from you guys in those comments down below. What did you guys think about the weapon balancing they did with this Season 2 update? Do you like the changes they made? Do you dislike any of the changes? Do you feel like there should have been more changes? Just let me know all of those thoughts down below. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated. And don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.